In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey, welcome to the Ambercast. I'm John Towers. This evening we have a special guest. We have an interview lined up. We don't do very many of these anymore. We have Geoff Hunnef here on the phone. I hope I didn't butcher your name, sir. You're the author of The Spaces in Between, A Journey into Self-Evolution. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Love your show. I have to say I've been listening to it quite some time, and the information has always been greatly researched, and love it. Thanks for doing the work.
Oh, yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate that. That kind of stuff makes my day. So you have a website, geoffhunnef.com. You do some blogs, and you have some posts on your book up there. So I just want to make sure to get that out there early so everyone can go and check it out. I am not butchering your name, right? Is that how it goes?
No,
Hunnef?
no, you nailed it. You got it.
All right. So I like to start these things out with asking about folks, if you were raised in like a religious environment, and how was religion present, when you were growing up?
Right. I was raised Roman Catholic. I was quite involved in it. I was part of the church. I was an altar boy, serving in it and all that. And then around somewhere in the teens, whether that was due to puberty or just hitting the age of reason or something, I kind of defected from that, saw the light, so to speak, in the sense of like just that there was a lot of hypocrisy, let's call it that there. So I decided to kind of jump ship on that, and found over the years, three main people that were very influential in my perspectives were certainly George Gurdjieff, Aleister Crowley, and Osho. Those three people there, I found were really interesting. And even more so, I thought was interesting, I came across a book recently called The Three Dangerous Magi that talked about those three guys.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But cool. That was the main influence. And of course, philosophy was a huge part too.
Yeah. So where are you now? What, if you would label, I'm not even sure if you do label yourself, but like where do you think that you fall now as far as like religion is concerned?
Right. Yeah. No, I unfortunately I have to say more of it as a spiritual perspective of it there than anything else. I certainly, I can't say I belong to any particular group or ideology. I'd like to say that they all have certain points that are great, that are really useful and insightful. And I think ultimately that there's a lot of value in having a more collective perspective that's overlapping all these different perspectives and siding with any one particular one itself. That's just me, right? This is all just like how we see the world and how we're relating to it and what we're doing in it.
Yeah. I think there's a growing, it seems to me like there's a growing movement about that. Like people have an idea, and it's not new, but they have this idea where it's all the same. It's just different names, whether you're
right.
looking at the Goetia or like a Jesus or, anything like that. So tell us you seem to have a wildly kind of different sort of background. We were just talking about wearing many hats. It seems like you kind of fit under that too. Why don't you talk a little bit about yourself and the kind of stuff that you do?
I realized the book really touched on a broad range of different things with this. My background was in personal training. I was very much educated in physical fitness, and Martial arts was a big part of that, as well as weightlifting, gymnastics, and all these different kind of categories that you can get into. But from my time in that, I started seeing that there were depth to movement, that there were philosophies that started to form from, I call it kind of kinetic philosophy, but just through movements and motions that you started to derive certain concepts and ideas that affected, or that would overlap with the world that would come from just moving. So as a quick, very easy example, we get that by increasing resistance, we seem to increase our strength and our muscle mass, and we're able to kind of build and improve on ourselves by exposing ourselves to more challenging and difficult things. Right? That's a pretty simple, understandable idea. Right? But that obviously gets carried over into the mind as well, that it seems by stretching our perceptions of reality, by challenging our understandings of ourselves, that we start to stretch our limits of the mind to see things in different ways, and we're able to kind of, once you see things differently, you can do things differently with them. And then, of course, lastly, to tie that all back into the last portion is the heart, the emotions, and our relationships, and how, again, seeing that through challenges that we encounter with the body and difficulties that we are able to kind of work through with in our minds, the same thing applies to our hearts. When we're able to encounter more challenging and difficult experiences within our relationships, we're able to grow and be able to become stronger, more robust in many different aspects of ourselves. And so that was the real main thing that I was going at, was that there was this overlapping idea from the physical to the mental to the emotional that all have this similar structure to it. Obviously, you're not bench pressing your mind or your relationships, but
well, in a way, it's kind of like that, right? I mean, I think that's a great visual kind of example for what you're talking about. So, I thought that this was a great time to have you on the show. And the main reason why is because everybody that's listening to the show knows this occult and magic as psychology is kind of my thing, right? I love talking about that. And we are in the middle of talking about, or we're at the end of talking about Jung's Red Book. And so I thought that this would be a great opportunity to have you on, because we've been talking about philosophy, specifically Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra last year, and we've done the Goetia, and we've done the Thelema, Liber 3, Crowley, and all that stuff, and it seems like a lot of that stuff shows up in your book, and I thought that especially because we've been talking so much about Jung and the Red Book, this idea of ideation that Jung has. So I thought it'd be a great time to have you on, because it's touching so many of the third rails that we've been touching lately.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. I found so partly one of the things I talk about within the book is psychedelics, and along that realm of it there, how that and Jung coming together is through the hero's journey, which was also by Joseph Campbell. Jung came up with individuation, of this whole idea about how the cultures and patterns that have established us before kind of shape and mold us within a certain character, and it's about us stepping out of those things beyond the patterns that have been set by our parents and culture before, to kind of become awake in that sense. Joseph Campbell, he coined the hero's journey, relating it back to Jung's idea of individuation, of how essentially, and he was saying that when you look at all these different cultural stories across the world, you saw this a number of different stories that were similar. And one of them was the hero's journey, the idea that you would have this person that would be within a village or a family that's very guarded and protected, and they would have a calling of sorts that would beckon them to step out of the safety of their comfort zone, so to speak. And stepping out into the world, they would encounter friends and allies and teachers along the way that would teach them new things or bestow gifts or a weapon or armor or something. And it would all culminate in them coming to face a dragon or a demon of some sort at the end, where they would have to put together all the things that they've learned and come together as a group and vanquish the demon or the dragon, so to speak, and come back home a grown person and no longer a child that they left with.
Yeah, so everyone focuses on the killing the dragon part of that, but I think that the most important I think that the most important part of the monomyth is the coming home and reconciling all this awful shit that you had to put up with, and kind of shuffling it back home, and dealing with it. And people, this is the kind of stuff that people talk about, like wizards or whatever, when they're talking about like shadow work, reconciling these deficiencies or these like greedy or dark parts of your personality, not going one way or the other, but figuring out how to make them work together.
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I think Jung had said there, for a tree's branches to climb to the heights of heaven, its roots must extend to the depths of hell, right?
Yeah. And then have you read the Red Book or
I have. I've been listening to you. Like I've been going through with you on it.
Yeah. Well, it's a beast of a book. It's huge, and it's like you're reading it and you're like, oh, I think he's going crazy. Like you're like, what is he going through where he's writing this stuff? And you're like, oh, I think he's going nuts. And in the last episode, which is the very tail end of the first part of the book, he's talking about having a schizophrenia. And you're like, oh, maybe he really was going crazy. But a lot of the dreams that he's analyzing in that is that part of it. It's kind of like the shuffling the good and the bad together and kind of like trying to find his soul again. And I thought that was important. And I'm constantly trying to figure out like a way to describe these things, like to, kind of like a normal person or something. I'm like, it's like Batman, Batman's, he goes through all this awful shit, but he doesn't become a bad guy because of it. He takes that shadow part and he puts it into like the good guy part, and he just becomes this real dark good guy, And that's kind of like the way that I was thinking about that that first part of the Red Book, reading all of that stuff. But your book is very impressive. Again, it's called The Spaces in Between: A Journey into Self-Evolution. And, you talk a lot about this kind of stuff. And I've been tinkering around with writing like an occult or magic psychology self-help book. But, you kind of did it. Like, I don't think so, but your book is like all encompassing. Like, you talk about different theories, you provide exercises that folks can do, and you even talk about like diet suggestions, so can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I just had somebody else send me a message there that was asking about nutrition and saying that I see you're talking about nutrition, what's the best way to go with it? And I realized when he said that, he missed the point of what I was getting at. And what I was talking about, as the title implies, the spaces between things, not in things themselves, which gets vague within the thing that you're trying to talk about, because you're using things to reference the space as opposed to the actual things that you're talking about. So again, it's like the idea that the world's in chaos and, everything's in turmoil. So a good place to start is, bring order to your room, make it organized, start setting up a regular routine that you're able to work off and put things together in an orderly fashion and build on. The problem is, and I take this quote from another movement coach, the things that we use to build us become the tools that we use to build us become the tools that we use to destroy us. Right? And so in that, the idea is we do things more. The longer that we do anything, it seems, for long periods at high repetition, bad things come about. And so, again, but it's like, but I don't know, I thought by working out, doing the same thing regularly, lifting weights and doing that's how you make progress. That's how you make development. But only for so far. When you repeat the same program over and over again, you hit plateaus, you stagnate, you no longer develop. But also you can develop repetitive strain injuries. You can develop imbalances across muscular imbalances across joints. So you can have a whole bunch of physical issues that start to happen when you start to repeat the same thing over and over and over again. When we look at nutrition, it used to be believed that you could develop allergic reactions to foods. That doesn't seem to be the case. What they did find, though, was that if you eat the same food all the time, you tend to become depleted in the other nutrients that you get from other foods. Quick example is like sailors, pioneers that were coming from Europe over to North America. They ended up encountering scurvy, right, due to a lack of vitamin C. They were getting fish. They could eat all the fish they wanted across the water, but the vitamin C that wasn't present in their diet caused scurvy, right? Not a good thing. Aside from even nutrition, when we go into like thought patterns, if you have the same thought over and over, that becomes obsessive, right? It's not a good thing with it. If we go into planting for crops, when you plant the same crop year after year in the same soil, you deplete the nutrients and you won't be able to continue to grow in a few years' time. And so this is where farmers will do crop rotation to allow for different nutrients to be replenished back into the soils, right? So again, this idea that doing the same thing over and over again. When we go into genetics, right, if you take the same gene pool and you repeat it over and over, now we're getting into like incest, right? And Thoroughbreds and all that stuff. And that doesn't seem to be good either.
No. Well, also, just in like your daily life, it gets problematic, right? Because it only takes, they say it only takes 21 days to create a habit, and usually they sell that as a good thing. But I find I find that having like a schedule, like it's like a habit, right? Like you're stuck in it. It's kind of like this Nietzschean time loop, where you're just doing the same thing over and over again. Like I'm going to be in this room the same exact time tomorrow. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it seems like there's not much room for growth if you're stuck in a time loop like that.
No, I like that time loop. I like that idea. But very much like what you're saying there is that like you start to hit the repeat button and over again, and next thing you know, 5 years pass and you're living a life that you didn't realize that you had signed up for. As an example, I was working with this one woman. She was early 50s. She came from she had all the check marks. She had a trophy husband. She had a white picket fence. She was a lobbyist for one of the states down in the States. And she had she's like, man, I have a really desirable life. Like, this is great. But in the last 20 years of her relationship, the last 5 of it, she felt like she's been dead within it. There's no excitement. There was nothing that was appealing to her. She felt like she had stopped living in that sense. And she then had gone off in the pursuit of trying to grasp at life a bit more, got into modeling, right? So she totally jumped out of what she was doing, got into modeling, which is fast and furious, but there was a lot of there was a lot of uncertainty over where you were going to be next week, whether you're going to have lineup for work. The pay that she took was cut in half, but it was thrilling. It was exciting, and it brought her something that she wasn't getting in the years that she was in this other relationship and the life that she was living before. I'm not saying that that's the way to go either. Partly what it is I'm suggesting it's in the space between these things. And so, the example of I use a pitch black room in my book there, that you're asked to find the center of the room and you can't see anything. At least one way that I can think of is that you would walk all the way to one end. You would touch the wall, and you would walk all the way to the other end, touch the wall, and you count the steps in between, right? You would literally go all the way to the end. And once you've established your boundaries, then you can start to find where that center may lie. But if you only stay within a 5x5 space of a 10x10 room, then your center will be defined by that 5x5 spacing.
Yeah, so I get it. I got lost in a haunted house maze filled with evil clowns one time, and like literally that's what I had to do. Is I had to walk and find the edge of the maze to get out. Yeah. So when I was reading that story, I was like, oh my god, now I'm in a time loop and I'm stuck back in the maze with these clowns. So yeah, okay. So using that idea, like the habit, usually people sell that as like a good thing, right? Like they're like, just quit smoking. All you got to do is just not smoke for 21 days or something. Yeah. And you're like, okay, well that's great. But there's also this flip side to it where, I believe apathy and, stuff like this comes from over scheduling. I don't know. I really didn't, I don't really have the words for it, but like, if you're caught in this time loop, it's like Groundhog's Day. He goes through the whole gambit. Yeah. He's like terrified, and then he's like apathetic and suicidal, and it's just because he's just reliving the same thing over and over again. So I see where you're talking about, like, you have to have that because you have to have, like, you can't live in complete chaos 100% of the time.
Right.
There has to be, like,
right.
some sort of normal. But on the other side, you know, in the middle of the room that you're trying to find, or on maybe in the middle of the room is the normal side, and like the edge that you're walking around is like a little bit of randomness, a little bit of danger to keep you on your toes, you know.
Yeah. No, I absolutely. Sorry, just going back to that woman's example there. It was living almost like too much of a predictable life. Even the idea of even a castle can become a prison to those who never leave its walls, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so part of the whole thing is that life is chaos. That, like, as much as you can get it back in order, the next thing is to step back out in chaos, to become familiar again with the randomness of life, because that's life. Life is not structured and ordered as much as we'd like it to be. It's not. And oftentimes when we do structure it and solidify it into a certain format, it tends to die. That there's something about the exposure to the randomness and the unpredictability of it there that keeps it more pliable, that keeps it more adaptive, that keeps it more flexible in a sense. And so that's where, again, it comes back into, like, again, back and forth. It's the space between rigidity and flexibility. It's the space between stability and unpredictability. Even within relationships, point out Esther Perel, she pointed out in her book, Mating Captivity, that, like, there are these dualistic natures that we are striving for within a relationship. One is that we're looking for predictability, reliability, and stability, right? If I'm looking to build a future with somebody, I want to make sure that they're not just going to jump ship tomorrow and I'm left high and dry with 3 kids and a mortgage, right? Something like that with it there. I want to make sure that I have somebody who's going to be there with me to do this. And yet at the same time, we're also attracted to mystery, novelty, newness, right? Those things there. And the reason why is because they offer opportunity for change. When everything is stable, everything is predictable, everything is the same, nothing changes. And it's when something new comes along that there's that opportunity for something new to come about. And so there's this space back and forth between these two things that we're constantly looking for within our relationship, as an example. And so, again, my point being is that it seems to be something much more in the space between these rather than in any one of them alone.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you're completely right. Like the worst thing for like a long-term relationship is like, oh, hey honey, it's, you know, Saturday at 8:00, you know, this is like when we're supposed to get busy. You know what I mean? Like this is like our bedroom time, like that, you know, like that's the worst thing that, you know, could happen in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm on board with that.
And so, like, you know, I talk about Gnosticism and Gnosis often on the show, and I'm a big proponent of that because they have, you know, some forms of Gnostics or whatever have this idea of salvation through experience. So if you're stuck in like this Nietzschean time loop, you're not opening yourself up for, you know, to get these points for your salvation or whatever. You know, it's like you're not traveling the space between the center of the room and the edge, so you're not giving yourself the opportunity to get any new experiences.
Right. And so that's where, again, we get stuck. We get stuck within those perspectives. We get stuck within those patterns, both physically, the routines that we're doing, but also like mentally, the thoughts that we're constantly having or the conversations that we're constantly finding ourselves into. And so this is where, like, Geoff was talking about falling asleep, and he was always advocating about waking up. And from what I gathered, I believe his main point on waking up was by doing things differently. As soon as you do something differently that's out of the norm of things, you kind of have to pay attention. You wake up to the moment. He gives the example of, like, you know, when you're going home from work, go home a different way. If you spend every day going home in a different route, you will start to become much more aware of your surroundings, your spaces that you're kind of walking around. You know your neighborhood far more thoroughly. There's a lot more. You may discover new restaurants or encounter new people. There's a whole bunch of the serendipitous elements that you just lose when you start to get into doing the same thing every day, because we fall asleep, we stop paying attention, and unfortunately that's where we start to lose out on a lot of the wonderful things that the world has to offer us.
Yeah, something as mundane as driving to work is very interesting, because I have a friend who's like, I don't remember driving to work. He's like, I remember leaving my house and I remember pulling into the parking lot at my day job,
Right.
and I don't remember the commute at all. And I'm like, how often does this happen? He's like, all the fucking time. This happens all the time.
Nice.
I'm like,
But
oh my God.
I bet though, if there was like a detour due to construction or an accident that caused a rerouting, they'd remember that.
Yeah,
It stands out.
Right?
It breaks the pattern.
Yeah, you break the pattern, right? Yeah, that's interesting for sure. So I wanted to talk to you because you talk in your book, the spaces in between, a journey into self-evolution. You talk about play, and that's something that I also talk about on the show as often as I can. Usually it comes up when we're talking about like ceremonial magic and the Goetia and all this stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking about creative play and how that's missing out of our daily life. And I wanted to kind of get your take on that, because you do talk about play in the book.
Yes. No, I kind of contrasted. A lot of the things that I talk about is within contrast of a polarity of sorts with it there. And so there's play and then there's work. And again, because we can see that there's certain times where it's like work needs to be done, we can't just be playing. And of course, there's other times where it's important to be able to play. And unfortunately, as you were pointing out, that as adults, we often lose the ability to play. There's a great quote that I have there in the book that was saying that we don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. And so I think that there's a big part to, in that play, it keeps us more robust. It keeps us more pliable to the different scenarios that may come up with it there. For my example that I know, like within martial arts, play is often like within some form of sparring or rolling or something where you're engaging in a spontaneous, unkind of formed kind of engagement. And that, you learn a whole bunch of things about, not just like, I learned a new technique that I can apply, but you start to learn different interactions with people, how different people, some people are aggressive, some people are fairly docile, right? You get some people that are really flexible or very strong. You get a whole wide range, and that all communicates a whole bunch of different things to you that you start to learn about other people, not just within a fighting situation, but where you can start to see that, like how people tense up, or you start to notice their breathing changes when they're starting to get into stressful situations. All those things there start to give you more information from that interaction of physical play in that sense. But I really liked how you put it there in that sense of play within doing ceremonial magic, where you get a chance to enact. So just interestingly enough, there was, do you know Alejandro Jodorowsky, the director?
Yeah.
Perfect. Good. So he also does a bunch of things. He tells the tarot, but also he's a type of therapist. He came up with his own form of therapy of some sort.
Oh wow.
And he had called it psychomagic. Right?
Okay.
And it was right, and it was essentially psychological magic was what it was in the terminology of it.
Yeah.
But he had noticed that there were certain things essentially through he was saying that in old formats of talk therapy, it had failed to provide much of what it had promised to set out to do originally. And so he was saying that like talk is good, it's useful, it's there, but there comes an aspect of like an action in reality that syncs with the change of thought in your mind. As a quick example, I'm going to quit smoking tomorrow, but then I don't do anything to change. I'm still smoking. I'm still doing the same patterns and routines. I'm putting myself in the same scenarios and situations. Nothing has changed with it. And so, again, I could say I'm going to do it, but then I don't follow through with it. And he was implying that there needs to be a physical act that manifests within the world that gives way to that. And speaking to the subconscious, in particular, the subconscious seems to be the predominant guiding force behind most of our daily lives, that it becomes a matter of like consciously I'm going to make a decision on it, but it's the subconscious that really needs to click in on that. And the subconscious communicates through non-linguistic formats. So that's like through symbols, through gestures, through smells and sounds, and all sorts of other things that are not verbal. And so he was coming up with these kind of prescriptions of physical acts that you would do in the world that would convey a symbolic message to the subconscious in regards to acknowledgement of a desire or an issue that had laid from the past. As one example I watched him do was he was speaking to this young woman. She was, I think, sexually abused by a female teacher of hers when she was, I think, 7 or 8 years old, and had used a pointer stick. Right?
Yeah.
And, right. Yeah. So that had laid on her in terms of her relationships and affecting her connections to both men and women that she had throughout her life. And so she was coming to him to speak of help me with my relationships. So what he, after listening to her story and all that, what he had recommended was he had pulled out a pointer stick. So he must have known about it. He pulled out a pointer stick and gave it to her and told her to hold it in your hands. And I want you to imagine all of your associations, your connections, the things that you think about, anything that comes up when you look at this stick. It's not the same stick, but it's to represent that stick.
Right.
And I want you to take all of those ideas or those thoughts and emotions and put it into the stick, right? So he gave her a moment to put it into the stick. And then he told her, okay, now I want you to break that stick up. And
right.
She starts trying to break that stick, and she was struggling quite a bit trying to break that stick. There was a host there that jumped in to try and give her some pointers on how to get better leverage, and Jodorowsky was like, no, this is for her. If she can't figure that out, that's her problem. This is her challenge, right? So a bit more encouragement, she breaks the stick. He's like, great, okay, now keep breaking it further. So she keeps breaking up into smaller pieces, and then she's like, wow, I didn't think I could break that. He's explaining, well, it's because you were the 7-year-old girl who was holding that stick. It was that, and it was until you were able to kind of relate to that and break through it and break those pieces up there where you have to overcome that hurdle. So that wasn't enough. He was then saying, take those pieces, put on the table, and now I want you to treat this like a holy relic. I want you to take these pieces back home, and I want you to dig a hole in your front yard, and I want you to bury those pieces in the hole, and I want you to plant a fruit tree on top of that.
Yep.
So that way your trauma bears fruit. Right?
Yeah.
It was poetic. It was beautiful. It was symbolic. And again, he's also saying, I'm not saying that this is going to help you or not, but these gestures start to put you on a path of healing where you start to do some work on yourself with it there. There's something that's being done as opposed to when you're just sitting there on the couch doing nothing on a Friday night. When you engage in these activities, there's something going on that's more than when you're just being passive and watching the next series on Netflix.
Yeah, so people do this kind of thing with crystal work. Like they'll put a bunch of negative energy into one of their crystals or something, and then they'll go and purify it somehow, like with the moon or with the smoke or sage, or they'll bury it.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And that like dissipates the whatever negative energy that they've put into there. And am I saying that like the crystal really takes on this negative energy? I don't know, but these people believe it does. So it helps on some sort of level. It seems like the same kind of thing, and I'm down with that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that's all good. That's all good stuff.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at subscribestar.com.
But so play, like we were talking about, like kids. It's cool if a kid plays, but not cool if an adult plays. And I think it's interesting because like kids. So when I grew up, I was like, I had an awful childhood, and I was a loner as a kid, and like basically my life revolved around my Star Wars action figures. You know what I mean? Like it was like every day, all day, it was like Star Wars action figures, and that is important when you're a kid, because that's when you learn that you can fight, Darth Vader or the dragon, like in our older example, and those are lessons that we can drag with us into, adulthood. But I think us not playing as adults, if it's not like acceptable, like we're missing an opportunity to like practice maybe dying or practice, getting old or something like that. That's the kind of stuff that I think of. I think of like Masonic initiation ritual, and I'm like, that's them practicing dying. That's them like, is my shit in order? Because I'm not going to be around, forever. Like these guys are going to bonk me on the head and I'm going to die, So, I do talk a little bit about the lack of initiation process in our culture too. And I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yes, John, you can. I love your show. For sure. That was actually. Don't know if I posted yet. There was an article that I just finished writing there that was talking about just that, the lack of initiations within our culture. Partly, just to go on a little bit here, it's this is my personal opinion of it, that in regards to the philosophies, the two major philosophies that had formed within the world from East and West, again, I'm very broad stroking this, okay? We're going to really, really broad stroke with it. But the West was about separation, reductionism, and compartmentalization, where the East seemed to be about dissolving boundaries, to remove the idea that, or to see the idea that observer and seen are the same thing, that, you know, I am you, and that there is no boundary between me and the universe, universal oneness in that movement, in that sense of it there, that those, which is opposites of each other. One is about breaking everything down to small pieces and components. The other one is about dissolving and becoming one with everything. And so partly when looking at we'll keep it there. Keep going a whole bunch more. From that point, the Western idea was about separation, compartmentalization, reductionism as a possibility. It's just opinion I kind of put together of it there. Was that, like, when you look at the people that came from Europe to North America, they separated themselves from Europe. They separated themselves from culture. They separated themselves from tradition that was largely held within Europe, within that sense there. And when you go to North America, I think a very common trend is, I call it the Great North American Exodus. It's, every North American kid wants to move out as soon as possible. They want to gain their freedom as early as they can. There's a Canadian comedian named Russell Peters. He's East Indian, born in Canada. And he made a comment about his observations growing up in the world, in Canada, in Brampton, Ontario, was that he would go into some of his friends' homes and he would hear his friend greet his mom like this: "Fuck you, Mom." Right? And he was just like, what? Like, nowhere else in the world can you do that. like you get your ass beat for that. So, I mean, there was a distinct thing about the West in North America, at least what I've seen within my own culture and what seems to be kind of ubiquitous across North America, is this sense of disconnect, this sense of separation. And in that disconnect and separation, in the pursuit of individuality and self-expression, that we cannot connect with each other anymore, that we've dropped our values of old. The things that were done in the past have been relegated to history, and we no longer do those things. And so in that, we, as getting to what you're talking about, is the initiation, right? There is no acts anymore that really define when a child becomes an adult in our culture. One of the things, again, this is a bit of like just, spacey ideas out there, but was that how, like, with, was it epigenetics of how, like, your environment can create cues for the genes to turn on or off in various formats and ways. And then you get into this idea that, like, so the experiences shape us in various formats. So the type of environment that we expose ourselves to can have the potential to trigger various developments or turning things on or off within our bodies. So then when you look at, like, the average individual, right, if the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over, expecting different results, and I don't really like the way that the majority of the population tends to be like, Friday night, let's watch Netflix and chill, right? Let's hit that repeat button for the next, 5 years in a row. That's a consistent thing. So if I don't want to be like that, then I should probably do other things than what those people are doing. And so initiations is one of those. The average North American doesn't do anything that has any indication of a challenge to overcome, a fear to rise over, or any of that. Some of the things that I've encountered, my personal experiences, was I did a suspension. That was kind of a unique experience there. That seems in certain cultures. I did not appropriate this from any culture, just so we're clear. It was not North American Sundance or anything like that, but it certainly, my first exposure to a suspension was in, I don't remember the movie A Man Called Horse.
Right. It's a Western, right? Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay, good job. It's an older film. But it was about a cowboy that gets captured by some Native Americans, and he's kind of held and being treated like a horse, more or less, like a pack mule. And he ends up falling in love with a girl from the tribe, and for them to become a couple, he would have to be a man of the tribe. And to become a man from that, you'd have to go through this initiation ritual, which was the sun dance, where they would take these hooks or skewers or bone, and they would push it through the skin, and they would often be suspended up in the air by these things, and for an indefinite period of time or such, and that was their initiation path. So in that, I've heard of that. I was like, wow, that's pretty intense. Never had any interest to go do it or anything. That was just, it was just like, that's intense. And then years later, I ended up getting in contact with somebody who knew some people that's what they do for a business.
Okay.
That's what it was their business. They do suspensions. So I signed up for it. I was like, well, when are you going to have that opportunity again? Right.
Right. Yeah.
So I was like, yeah.
Yeah. The pictures are gnarly, by the way, of your suspension. Like, they're pretty cool pictures.
Oh, thanks. They weren't the best pictures. I wish I could have gotten better ones, but at the time that I did it, that was my phone, and that was the most I had of evidence of my experience with it.
Yeah.
But
here in Pittsburgh, we have like a little suspension scene. Like there's folks that get together on the weekends and just hang each other by hooks. It's crazy.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. There's a group right there.
Yeah, right. After seeing your pictures, I was like, "Hey, man, I might need to go get hung up on these hooks."
It was certainly an experience.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where, I didn't know much. And people are asking afterwards. They were always like, "So why'd you do that? Like, was it sexual? Was there something about that?" And you're like, "No, that was the furthest thing from my mind on that that moment." But afterwards, upon reflecting, yeah.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm just saying that, like, I found that there was a greater sense of knowing myself and what I was able to say yes to and follow through with. Where there have been encounters before where people will step up to the precipice, but when confronted with the actual moment, they turn and shy away. And in giving these opportunities to say yes and step up and follow through helps to reaffirm the sense of self and what it is that you're able to kind of commit to. And that's what I got from it.
Yeah, and just like the man called Horse is like, they weren't abusing him when they hung him up, because every man in that tribe had to go through that ordeal. So it's like when he was done with that, then he could look at every man of the tribe or whatever and be like, we've all gone through that, and that's a tough, cool thing. The closest thing I think that there is like military, like a military here in the US. Like, I've been out of the Army for I've been out of the Army forever. And whenever I see a dude in uniform, or I see one of my Army friends popping off on Facebook, I'm like, I got that guy's back. We all have this shared experience to where, I might not know him. I might not have talked to him in like 20 years or something, but I'm like, yo, if I was in the room with that guy and someone was trying to shoot him, like, we would have problems, and I think we're lacking because of this. Like, I mean, I don't know, maybe like in the 50s, it could have been like high school sports could have been something that filled that sort of role or something. But I mean, I just don't know.
No, you're right. I agree with that. I think that probably military would be the closest to something where it's kept within a certain structure, because I mean everything else is all super, I don't want to say flimsy. It's not flimsy. It's just that there's few things that have structure. So I don't know. I'm not a Freemason, but I get the idea that within Freemasonry that there's initiation rites and things that you're doing within that. I don't know if it's on the same level of intensity, or if it's kind of producing the same degree of bonding or forming relationships in that sense.
Yeah, I know Freemasons, and it does work for them like that. Like, they're all very tight. I drink with a couple Freemasons, and it's funny because I know more about some of the shit that they do than they know about. But yeah, I don't know. I just kind of wanted to get your take on that stuff, because it seems like something that, maybe if there's a follow-up book, maybe that's something that, you could kind of tackle or something.
Because I could also see in regards to psychedelics that could be a form of initiation as well, in regards to stepping out into the veil of the unknown, in that sense where, again, I don't know if you know, much of the research has been coming out from universities and such, giving the backings towards psychedelics and what they've been finding with it, but it seems to be an extremely useful tool at treating a variety of issues that range from depression and anxiety to PTSD. Not saying that that's a guarantee or anything. Again, I'm not a doctor.
Right.
I'm not making claims on it. I'm just saying what universities are pointing out, what they're saying.
Yeah, well, I think it's obvious that the pharmaceutical approach isn't the optimal approach in a lot of cases. I know dudes that have PTSD, and I've suffered depression, and my wife is bipolar, and I've had schizophrenia and all this kind of shit in my family, and I'm like, hey, I think we should put everything on the table and not just pump everybody full of this medicine. And again, I'm not a doctor, and I'm like, I guess that's why I get so wound up over this magic and stuff as an arm of psychology. I think we're missing it. I think we're missing a big opportunity to exploit with this stuff. Talking about the things we're talking about, practicing death, the role of play, the role of initiation, that can bring us closer to humanity. And I think we're inundated with fake art, maybe not fake, artificial uncloseness right now in our culture. That's what I see when I look around, and I'm like, God damn social media for what it has happened to to our culture. I just see we need a way to connect more than calling each other names on Facebook or something.
yeah for sure.
And I mean, I know that you're in the Great White North, but down here, with this election season and stuff, it's just crazy. It's insane. What's happened to us. So yeah, that's kind of why I haven't posted anything in 4 months or something. It's just, I'm over it.
yeah. No, it's tricky where I get that So partly, I think, in regards to the issue of what we're seeing in at least North America, I don't know what it's like in other parts of the world. From what I'm hearing from people in the States, similar in terms of the overall dynamic in Canada as well with it there. In regards to this idea of connection and relations and being able to relate and have a community of sorts and stuff like that with it. It's unfortunate, but I think because of that desire for individuality and self-expression, that in order for me to hang out with you, there's got to be certain personal self-expressions that I'm going to have to set aside or be okay with subverting and being on board with something that's more collective that may not necessarily fully encompass myself and my expression. Because of that slight, I have to put myself off a bit. People tend to not connect. It's surprise. I'm not saying that that's the only reason but just that it tends to be this big sense of I don't know what it is. People not wanting to fully connect in certain ways. You see it a lot online in regards to the dating scene, even where you get a lot of people where it's there's a lot of talk, but very rarely do you end up connecting with people or meeting face to face. Or when you do, it's brief, and you hear about people constantly finding it's difficult to find people that are wanting to kind of commit to a bit more of a long-term relationship or something that's more invested. And again, I even just today I was reading an article from Vice magazine that was talking about sexual activity has been on the decline. I'm sure partly COVID has played a factor in it.
Okay.
But prior to that, they were noticing that with the youth, the kids these days, they're just not doing it the way that we used to. These were our ancestors, our grandparents. On one level, you're okay, cool, great. They're not being controlled by their hormones anymore and all that. But at the same time, there's other questions that are coming up in regards to how is that going to affect their social skills in the future? Does that have an impact on sexuality in their future? Does this indicate anything about their current state of depression? Again, just oftentimes when you're depressed, you're not feeling overly libidinous and adventurous in that regards, and vice versa. When you're not getting much, oftentimes you start to feel a little depressed.
Right. It's actually, it becomes an endless cycle, because you're depressed because you're not getting laid, and you're not getting laid because you're depressed.
You're depressed, right? It's terrible. Oh God.
All right, so okay, so we were talking earlier about like people that are like stuck in cycles or like a Nietzschean time loop or something, and if someone had like a problem like that, like say they're just like completely regimented, what would some ideas or exercises that you could sort of suggest, to help people break their the cyclical and existence they're in?
Right. So one of the ideas that I came across was I took from this guy named Carl Gustav Jacobi, who was a Russian physicist. Physicist, yeah. I think it was. Anyways, he was a guy who was really good at math in Russia. Okay, you get the impression that a lot of those Russians are.
Yeah, right.
And, he was known for slaying these monstrous mathematical beasts, and they would come to him and they'd be like, Jacobi, how are you doing this? How are you doing that all the time? And he would exclaim, invert. He's like, just take the equation and write it backwards, and you're going to see new things. All right? Like just in that sense of it there, when you flip things upside down in some way, shape, or form, you're going to get a new perspective. And I'm not saying that new perspective is better or worse. It's just new. And the whole idea is that you're trying to collect perspectives. I give the example of like when you're looking at, like, let's just say it's nighttime, you're looking out and you see a dark alley to the left and you see the silhouette of a tree in the moonlight to the right. And that's what you see in your normal vision. When you switch to night vision, you might be able to see that there's a doorway at the end of the alleyway. And when you switch to heat vision, you might see that there's somebody behind the tree, right? Mm-hmm. And so each one of them provides an element or a perspective of reality that is true to themselves, but each one holds something that the others don't. When you're able to hold on to each perspective at the same time, you're able to do more things. You can make more decisions on what's going on with it there. You're more informed of what's going on in reality. So getting to what you're asking about in regards to these ideas of like when you're coming upon rigidity within the same practices of things, invert. I'm a big fan of inversion. And so the example I often give is that if you take an image of a man and you tell something like invert it, and people will like they might flip him upside down so he's standing on his head. And then if you said invert again, they might take the person from being face up to face down, so they're laying on the ground with their back up to the ceiling now. You say invert again, and you might take that person and you turn them inside out where their guts are on the outside.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
You say invert again, and you may take the man and you make him a woman, right? So in each inversion, invert, flip, however you want to word that, there's a new perspective that can come about from the way that you're looking at it. It's not always going to be like, I want to live, so invert, go die. But at the same time, we get the idea that if you want to live, analyze your death, analyze what it means to die, realize that there is a mortality to us, that there, things are fleeting, and that everything is in transient states, and that nothing is forever, and that except for maybe death, and even that we don't know. So in that, like the idea of inverting helps a lot. So where this comes back into the routines that we do, as you start to change things, it's very important to pay attention to what changes when you make a different thing. So as an example, switch brushing your teeth with your right hand to your left hand, or vice versa if you're left-handed. Turn around and face the mirror with your back instead of the front. So these are just like, it literally is just do something different. But then you want to analyze, you want to look at what changed when I did it differently. And as you do that, much in the same way as when you go home a different route, you start to have a greater mapping out of your neighborhood, of the streets that you're in, of the people that you encounter in the neighborhood around you, right? So just as you start to change things, you'll start noticing, again, it's like as you change the way that you look at things, the things that you look at change. And so it comes back into how many different ways can you look at the same thing.
Yeah. So I was about to say, so one of the things that really helped me get out of, we'll just say a slump, like I was having one of these, Nietzschean time loops at one point in my life, and I really learned just not to dig in like not to fortify my position and kind of let things happen as they may. And then another thing that happened is I flipped from working like a day shift to working night shift for a week, once a month. So we went from working like 3 weeks worth of day shifts and then work one night shift, work 1 week a night shift. And it is so disorienting, right? Like waking up when you're supposed to be going to bed and then like, like being where you're supposed to be, getting up to take a leak is lunchtime, like it's so crazy. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's just like a way to experience your day from a totally different different way. Yeah. And
you notice it differently. As you're saying, you experience it differently. And in that there's things that you notice, like again, just like, oh, I'd normally be taking a piss at this time and I'll sit down for lunch.
Yeah. Or like, you're getting off of work, people are eating breakfast and you're like, it's Miller time. You're trying to find a bar that's open, like that's the first thing I thought of when you were talking about the invert. Like I wasn't turning my dude upside down. I was flipping his work schedule around and I was like, oh, I remember that shit, man. That's rough.
Yeah. So in that there, and this is where it's always important, is that like nothing is absolute. I always like to think of the analogy that I give of a spinning coin, that when you take a stance in any one position, it's like laying the coin flat down, but its heads or tails are up, right? It's yes or no, it's black or white, whatever. It's just in that position, and it stays in that way. When you find a way to dance on the edge and you exchange between front and back, the coin comes alive, and it spins, and it dances on the space between front and back. Right? That's where I'm getting the title of the book.
Right.
Right? You see it comes together there.
Yeah.
It's in the space between these things is where there's dynamic motion. It's in the exchange of front and back does a wheel turn. Right? So it's very much in the idea when we venture out to the edge and when we come back in, that's where there's things. When we stay out on the forefront, when we stay on that pioneering edge, that's really strenuous. That's difficult and that's challenging. Lots of reward, but there's lots of risk involved with it as well. And so there could be a very trying and challenging space to be in all the time. But just like with training, when you give yourself exposures to challenging things, we start to grow and become more capable of being the person that can take those things to be able to handle those situations. And so that's where, again, so much of that comes back into being more encouraged to face those difficult, challenging experiences or conversations, as that seems to be where there's a lot more growth and a lot more potential to change as a person. Speaking of like with psychedelics, I refer back to it a lot because there was a lot of lessons to learn from those. And one of them was like in these more darker experiences, speaking of like shadow work and such with it there in terms of coming to see certain aspects of yourself or things that you don't necessarily want to acknowledge about yourself and being in a way forced to confront those elements. It can be very scary and it can be very intimidating and terrifying. And yet at the same time, I found time and time again, I've walked away with more knowledge of myself, with more sense of action of what to do with myself and what I'm acting in the world. As a quick example with it there, one of my experiences was I saw a relation between the relationship that I have with my children and the relationship that I have with my parents. I had a disconnected relationship with my parents. It was one of those things. They weren't terrible people or anything. It was just, again, I wanted to move out as early as possible. I wanted to gain independence as early as I could and go on and move away from that point there, and parents were a thing of the past and all that. Seeing that there was a similar relationship that was forming with my daughters, I didn't want to repeat that generational patterning, right? I didn't want to see that same relationship form with my kids that I had with my parents. So on mushrooms, I saw that like it would be a good idea if I want to build the relationship with my children, maybe start with my parents. And I started to work more on rekindling and rebuilding the relationship that I have with my parents, going so far as to even invite my mother to come live with me and my family in my house and forge a relationship in that sense. And that has turned out to be for all the better.
That's wise, yeah.
Better. Right. You know what I'm saying? So that's where I found that there was a lot of value in these experiences. And in particular, it was in these darker ones was where there was opportunity. And so going back into reality, not just within these states, that it's, again, in these darker, more challenging spaces is where there's greater opportunity. Don't get me wrong. light and sunshine and all that stuff is great, and it's important to have. But at the same time, it seems to be in those darker spaces where there's more healing that can take place. There's more development that forms.
Yeah, no, I get it. And just real quick about this, I love this kind of example of the spinning coin, like not being yes or no. I think that one of the very important things we have to learn before we get to being comfortable with that spinning coin is to take your ego out of some decisions. You know, like you can't marry yourself to your yes or no answer, and you have to be available to like dive in the darkness to figure that shit out, because the brightness and the sunlight and the Pegasuses and the unicorns and stuff, that stuff is fun and it's great, and the reason it's fun and great is because it doesn't take any work to appreciate it, you know.
Yes,
like,
well put.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to marry those two sort of ideas together and be like, you got to get your ego out of some of these things.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you, which is difficult, right? Because I mean, I get that we're constantly like, you know, each of us are the stars of our own movies of life, and it's difficult to set aside and
a lot of times it just seems like people are just looking for validation. Like the yes or no answer doesn't really mean anything as long as you agree with me. You know what I mean? So it's like,
right, yeah.
So I don't know. Anyhow, I'm just dragging my own personal bullshit into this now.
It's a good place for it.
I guess.
Personal experience.
So, is there any other kind of exercise or anything that you would suggest to anyone who might want to shuffle things up, or?
I mean, like, so again, like it always comes back to like what it is that you're doing in these experiences as well. But like, you know, one thing that I found that was extremely useful at having a reflective quality upon my life is going for a walk in a cemetery at midnight. I find that there is something about that space that you can't help but reflect upon mortality, to think about life and death, and to give more context to the relationships that you have in the present moment. That has been an exercise that I've gone back to over and over again. I've taken people on little like excursions I call spirit walks, where I'll take a group of people out for, you know, I'll have an idea of where we're going, but they won't really know, and then we'll just go for a walk at nighttime into the forest or into a cemetery, into various places where it creates a new atmosphere for people to kind of engage with the world, as they often get caught up within certain trappings of patterns.
Yeah.
One thing that we often don't do is go for walks at night.
Right. No, I would put this in the same kind of realm as, you know, playing as ceremonial magic. Like, you know, you're putting your robes on, you're lighting your candles, you're reciting some weird shit, and you're bugging yourself out. You know, it's kind of like, I believe kind of like the same kind of realm. It's serious, it's play, but it's serious play, but you know, you're putting yourself in this mental state to get freaking yourself out a little bit, you know, like, and thinking about these things. I think that's important.
And is what you're saying with what you're doing in that, like, you're breaking the patterns of routine. Like, that's not what everybody is doing on their Friday night. And so in that, you're going to have a different experience. People ask on Monday, what'd you do over the weekend? You're like, well, hey, guess what I did? What did you do? And they're like, oh, I watched 3 seasons of Friends. You know, which again, I get. Like, there's a lot of good series out. There's phenomenal programs. They're well written. They're good. I get it. But
you have to find the space between Friends and ceremonial magic. Like,
right? Oh, well put. I like it.
Well, man, hey, I've had a great time chatting with you. I knew that I would, and I think it's just been great. And I love your book. I can't recommend it enough. Do you have anything that you want to kind of cover that we haven't gone over that you want to squeeze in?
I mean, like, I won't even bother going into relationships in regards to, like, I got a whole thing on sex I get into there. I'm not going to bother on that. But if people want to see more of that, they can check out the book. I find a lot of people aren't crazy about talking about it, but there's a lot of insight that comes from that area that gives more credence to the whole thing that I'm proposing and what I'm talking about in the book. in short, though, changing things up and breaking pattern that ranges all the way from the mundane to the insane. And that's where I found that there's a lot of value in taking more. If you want to be good at something, have lots of different teachers, right? And so just in that, expose yourself to lots of different things. That's all. There we go.
And I think it's important, I don't think we've mentioned it enough, is this idea, the spaces in between. This idea is like for your emotional state, your mental state, and your physical state. It's kind of like a trifecta kind of
John,
thing.
if I didn't know any better, I think you've read the book. Oh my God.
No, but the book is great. And if would you call it a self-help book? I don't know if that.
I didn't really know. I get like that was kind of like the area that I was. I don't know. I feel like it was like partly philosophy or practical philosophy, or I didn't really know.
Yeah.
It seems like self-help is the category. It's like trying to give you ideas about how to change your life, but like, it's a bit different.
Yeah. I was trying to categorize. I was looking at my bookshelf and I was like, where would it fit in here? And, but it's cool because it works on those three levels. I think that, I think it's just interesting. I think it's got a lot of great ideas, and thank you very much for writing it and sharing it with me.
Oh, John, thank you very much for having me on your show. I love it. Thank you very much for giving me a chance to speak on it, and I'm always looking forward to hearing the next episode. All
right, man. So with that, remember, the name of the book is The Spaces in Between, A Journey into Self-Evolution, and you can check out geoffhunnef.com. He's got a blog. Check out the suspension pictures if you're interested in that at all. Yeah, right. And cool, man. So like I said, thank you very much for being on the show. It was a blast.
Oh, thank you, John. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
If you're considering supporting the show on Subscribestar, let me tell you a little bit about what's going on over there. The degree of the Red Archive, which is the $1 a month, you get access to some bonus audio, but there's also 50 plus hours of archived episodes. These are older episodes. They're not on the stream anymore. It's the only place to find them is in the Red Archive. There's a $3 a month tier called the Fellowcraft degree, and that has 30 and 40 hours of exclusive Fellowcraft episodes. You get access to all of those. And those have never been on the stream. Those have never been on the normal show. They're exclusive only to the Fellowcraft degree. $5. The $5 tier is the degree of the Red Mark. And so for $5, you get the archived episodes, you get the Fellowcraft episodes, and then you are able to get some swag, bookmarks, temporary tattoos, exclusive tarot cards, all different kinds of stuff coming out every once in a while. And then for $10 a month, you become a knight in the degree of the Vessel of the Art. So the Vessel of the Art degree, you get the archived episodes, the exclusive episodes, the swag, and then you get like the keystone of all swag. You get your very own Vessel of the Art, which is a full-size, fully glass mason jar with the Abercast Sigil logo on it. So if you're considering helping out and supporting the show, that's where you do it, and that's what you get. If you look around on Abercast.com, you can also find a PayPal donate button. So if you don't want a monthly thing, another monthly thing to take care of. But you're like, hey, Towers is a good guy. I want to buy him a drink. You shoot me, not a coffee. I don't drink that shit, but you could PayPal me some money. All of your help is appreciated. And, yeah, that's it. I'm John. This is it. Like I said, I'm okay.